Good afternoon, Packaging 450. Welcome. We are on chapter 6. I have two more lectures you're going to get. I was traveling. You can probably tell from my poodle hair, I was in a hot, humid place. But with that being said, I'm going to have two more lectures after this one. Today, we're covering chapter 6. Tomorrow, we'll wrap up chapter 6, which is rental companies. I'm sorry, not tomorrow. The last two lectures, one will wrap up chapter 6 and talk about the sustainable packaging guidelines that were recently released in the automotive industry. So I think that is something good to know. There won't be any tests or homework on it, but it is something that is supplemental that I really think is important for you all to have. And I think that the last thing I'm going to do is go over fleet calculations one more time, because that's really a key point. And so at this point, the last bit of homework, I know everyone's working on the rest of the homework that was homework 5, and I split up into 2 because it covered chapters 5 and 6. So people are working on that. The only additional work that you might choose to do would be the extra credit. That again will be 50 points. I put the criteria in D2L so you can see it. Looking for, I think, about 750 words to recover your aspects, what you thought of the video about automotive packaging and how it was set up originally in the 80s in automotive. So, and that was with Stephen Beeler. So if you have any questions on that extra credit, let me know. Put the due date on there. I think it is Monday, the 15th at 5 p.m., but it is in the assignment. So double check on that. Look in D2L and the details are there. With that being said, I'm going to move into chapter 6. So I am going to share my screen. And here we go. So chapter 6 is all about rental companies and standardization. So rental companies would be companies that sell returnable or make returnable packaging, and they would lease it or rent it to companies. And there's a whole process behind that. So this talks about, as we've talked about before, the closed loop system. You need to have a closed loop system because otherwise you're sending out containers and they just end up everywhere and you're just constantly buying containers. And then you basically have an expendable program for packaging, but you're calling it returnable because technically the packaging is returnable, but it has the second criteria to it being returnable is that you have to return it. So that's because that's how you make the profit. In the last few lectures last week, we talked about how you calculate the difference between the cost long-term of returnables versus expendables. And you can see hands down with freight and with the purchase of containers and the use over, say, a 5-year period, hands down, returnable containers are generally going to cost significantly less. And it's easy to justify the returnable versus the expendable. But with that being said, they have to be returned. If you buy all those containers, you buy $200,000 worth of containers and they get thrown in the trash, it's not a good return on investment at all. Okay, so there are a couple other industries that do use returnables. You probably have seen them and don't think anything of them, but some examples would be beverage companies. So you might see pop, which is what we say in Michigan. If any of you aren't from Michigan, it's soda, but pop bottles and cans are used. The groceries and the stores use returnable packaging. Bread, you will see bread packed in these short crates, or they look like short milk crates. They ship bread in that and they stack them. I just mentioned milk crates, so you do see milk that is shipped in returnables, and then sometimes you'll see fruits and vegetables. So those are some examples of items that are shipped in returnable packaging. As you can tell, many of them are food and specifically grocery items because they have more control over their loop of where they're shipping, so they can ship from a distribution center to a grocery store, and they have more control over it with those return trucks. I think another place that I've seen returnable containers would be when my first job out of school was doing packaging for McDonald's, and the bread would come in those same returnable, the buns would come in those same returnable trays. So those are just some examples. There are other industries, probably more industrial, that use them, but not so much as you would see in automotive. Okay, so you have two choices, as we talked about the ROI, and that was specifically for purchasing containers. The other choice would be to rent them from companies. So you have companies like CHEP, which used to be, they merged with CAPS, but they're all CHEP now. IFCO, Orbis, and Tosca. So they do make their own containers, and they manage the returnables for you. That's a whole other story. So we're going to go with what's in the textbook, or what's in our chapter. And then I'm also going to talk about reality. So when I mention reality, I'm going to break that out so that when you're doing the homework, you're answering it from a theory standpoint and how the companies are designed to work versus how sometimes they may work if you're not managing, or they're not managing the containers. Okay, so companies like CAPS or CHEP, IFCO, and Tosca, that's really what they do. They are in the business of rental and leasing of these containers. A company like Orbis, they do both. Orbis is really big on selling containers to you, so you can buy returnables directly from them. But then they also do have rental processes as well. But they're actually more known for their purchasing where you can purchase the containers from. So again, the CAPS Container and Pooling, they are now part of CHEP. They're based in Livonia, Michigan, so they're in the suburb of Detroit. So they're there to support automotive. So when CHEP took them over, that's kind of how I think CHEP got their foothold into automotive, because they weren't, I'd say 10 years ago, they really didn't have a foothold in automotive, but now they've gone over into that. Okay, so here's some information on CAPS. They have a system where they have like a distribution center or a depot, and they have a pay-per-use rental system. So they also have a one-time fee. So these are things that is really important to understand the contract. And as a packaging person, I think it's the packaging engineer's job to understand what these contracts for the rental companies are really about. Because if they go to sourcing or purchasing or procurement, whatever that department is called in whatever company you're at, and they go to sell this rental container system, they may not really be aware of some of the challenges that happen actually on the floor, and what actually happened, what gets returned, and how they track it. So you really want to understand the contract and how things work, all the worst case scenarios, what happens if you lose containers, all the fees. So it might say a one-time fee, but you really want to understand that. So it's kind of like with your bank, or maybe if you lease a car, you've got to read the fine print, and you've got to really understand what some of these fees are about. Because, like with your cell phone, sometimes you get fee on top of fee on top of fee. You may not really know what those fees are, but it's really important to know what they are, what they stand for. Okay, so CAPS, they track with barcoding. So they have metrics, where they look at, how long containers stay in the system. When they come back, how many are in inventory. They can also, you take a certain container and do a history of it, or certain types of containers, and they also can see like how many containers are being lost versus how many are being damaged versus how many you have in the system. They were set up originally for what's called a multi-location closed loop system. So what that basically means is that you might have, let's say, a car plant in, say we'll use Metro Detroit, right? Let's say you have Chrysler and you've got a Chrysler engine plant, you've got a truck plant, you've got a vehicle plant, maybe you have a transmission plant, but you might have 5 or 6 different locations just within the Metro Detroit area, maybe even across the border in Windsor in Canada. But they're, within a very short drive. But maybe the trucks will pick up at one plant, pick up at the engine plant, pick up at the powertrain plant, and then move over to the auto assembly plant and drop off parts there. That is an example where they have a closed loop, but they have multiple places that they're stopping, but they have a lot of control over it. So that's kind of what CAPS looks at. They list in the contract again, they ship at their expense, and they pick it up at their expense. They also have the capability to clean and repair. So they do an inspection. That they also keep track of that because they will charge more if they find that there is excessive damage. It says here that they claim to exceed JIT requirements. I personally don't know any companies that are using CAPS or even SHEP for JIT requirements, but this is what one of their selling points. So you can see how it works. So usually this is going to be someone like in the shipping area or material handling, and they know that it's time to refill or replace or replenish or whatever for their containers. So they'll reach out to them. It says they get intelligent containers and they can use them in their system. This is a very good example of understanding what intelligent means. Does this mean that they have a barcode? Does this mean they have an RFID tag? Does this mean they have a geotag? Those are all different ways of tracking. And depending on the system for tracking, you can get different levels of information. So, understand what intelligent means. And then it says they manage and track the fleet through their system. And then you send the containers back. They go back to CAPS when they get returned, and they do an inspection, they repair as necessary, and then that's the end of the cycle. So let's say you have that, when we calculated in the last homework, and the answer I think was 8 system days, this is part of that. So at the beginning of that cycle, you reach out to CAPS, and by that 8-day cycle, all 6 of these steps have happened. So that's the theory behind it. And they track those containers as well throughout that. Okay, here's some examples of some containers. They've got the 32 by 30 by 34. You probably heard me call that one the cube, baby cube, the bulk container. They also have a 70-inch by 48-inch by 34-inch container. So this is a longer container. This might be used to hold things like trim. Trim would be the cloth material that covers seats, for example, or the headliners, but these are long, sometimes narrow pieces, or maybe they could be bumper parts. But this would probably be something that you see long, narrow parts held in. And all of their containers fall into the AIAG automotive standard. So that's important too. In fact, the meeting that I just came back from, they are making packaging that doesn't have any automotive standards, and I'm trying to explain to them that they have to fall into these standards. There are customers asking for automotive standard packaging, and they're like, we could just make it bigger and fit more in the pack. No, you really can't do that. So this is important for any company that's looking at renting. They can get containers that they know are going to meet automotive standards. They meet a lot of the requirements for automotive, such as 4-way entry. They can even be stacked 6 high. Again, stack heights in the building are really dependent upon fire codes, really, where the sprinklers are and compared to the ceiling height. So And then they have a return ratio of 3 to 1, which means that for every one that they ship in, they can collapse them and 3 will ship out. So we talked about that before as well. So that helps get more empties on a container or on a trailer. Now, we talked about this before, the importance of getting as much material on a truck. And when I say material, I'm talking about empty packaging on a return truck as possible because of the cost and expense of trucks. People don't like to ship empty trucks. Even though there's packaging, people consider it empty because there are no parts in there. So if you can ship 1 truck instead of 3, that brings that cost down quite a bit. So that's one of his selling points. They also make totes, and totes are, again, the handhelds that we talked about, where you have the ergonomic limits, because it's handheld, and automotive will have a lower limit than what OSHA has. In general, I think it's generally somewhere between 20 and 30 pounds. I think 40 is the max, but that's neither here nor there. These are the totes that they also make. And they said they're also compatible with automotive or automated handling systems. So they could either go on an ASRS, which would be an automated storage and retrieval system, or they could go on an AGV, which would be an automated guided vehicle. So sometimes when you walk into the plants, in the Ford plant, in a Ford Rouge video, you saw the tugger drivers, but there are plants that have the automated guided vehicles where they're smaller. They might tug a cart or two, or they may be able to sit something on top of it and it'll drive down a route, a predestined route to the location and deliver parts. So these totes can fit on those sorts of systems. They also do make pallets, and these are the structural foam pallets, which are pretty common in automotive. And they fit in that same footprint for automotive for AIAG, which is 48 inches by 45 inches. So if you heard me say it once during this course, you've probably heard me say it a million times, that the pallet footprint for automotive is different than grocery. So it is the 48 by 45. Any questions, Brandon?
Nope, I'm all good.
Okay. The seat belts and lids, some places use them, some places don't. Most of the automotive places that I've worked, automotive facilities, they use seat belts very sparingly. But there are times when you need them. They also do what's called an intermediate bulk container. You will see these some in automotive, but these are generally used in other industries. Many of these will hold things like resin. I worked for a company that made copper cable, and they would get the resin in on trucks in bulk containers, something like this, or they also received the copper in on rail cars in bulk. So those might be examples of industrial where you might see some of these containers. They, as you'll see here, they have ports where they can, a lot of times when this product comes off a rail car, they might actually plug it in and fill it, and it might go straight to a machine, and it can suck out the contents out of the pack into their equipment, whatever it is that they may need. So those are some examples. This one says that they sell this one, and you'll notice that this one is a corrugated pack. So this one, I think, is a triple wall. It looks like a triple wall. So they'll sell that versus renting it. The one on this side, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. The one on this side is rented, and you can tell that it is a plastic-based product. Okay, so CHEP. CHEP stands for the Commonwealth Handling Equipment Pool. So that sounds very European. In fact, they started in Australia. And I mentioned before that CHEP has been acquiring companies. So CHEP now owns CAPS. So they started off as a military industry company. So they were working to help people, provide products for the military. So that's how they started using it. So they saw that the US in particular, the Army was leaving behind pallets when they would go to war. So eventually CHEP became privatized, and they started shipping pallets. And according to this, they operated the largest pallet pool in the Southern Hemisphere. So basically anything south of the equator, which would be, Australia, the southern half of Africa, South America, any of these countries, and any parts of Asia that fall below the equator. That's basically the Southern Hemisphere. At this time that this was written, CHEP had 12,500 employees, 500 service centers, and they were in 60 countries. And they had 500,000 customers. I tried to check to see the update, but honestly, with COVID and the pandemic, it's kind of been hard to get updates on certain things. So I don't really know if that's been the same or if it increased or if it got less during the pandemic. They sell this pallets, they sell totes, they sell bins, they have IBCs, the intermediate bulk containers, unit load, ULDs, and CCCs. So they sell a lot of different types of containers that are returnable. So what it does is they will ship out, or they'll issue the containers when they're needed. They get them back, they get shipped back to them when they collect them. They will do repairs and cleaning of these containers. That is what they theoretically say. So they have an inventory of 300 million pallets and containers. This is off the beaten track. This is not on the homework, my own commentary. So just keep this in mind. This is my commentary, not related to the homework. But my experience with CHEP was not that clear cut, just so you know. First, you will notice that, CHEP, they really tout the fact that they collect all these containers and manage them really well. But if you ever go anywhere that has pallets, if you see a stack of pallets, more than likely you will see at least one blue CHEP pallet. And it's a bright blue. It's actually one of my favorite color blues. So I noticed it right away, but it is a very bright blue. I think as we go through here, you'll see some of those pallets. But just notice now, you probably maybe you noticed it before, but as a packaging person, especially if you're interested in automotive, just take a look at these things. Look when you see any stack of pallets, and see in that stack if you see any blue CHEP pallets. They paint them bright blue so that they're easy to get a hold of, they're easy to catch and bring back so they don't get lost. But I've seen these blue pallets for CHEP proliferate everywhere. Going to the back of a grocery store or the back of any other store, I will see them. I will see, trucks that have a truckload of pallets, and there's always one. You will always see at least one blue CHEP pallet. That's just my experience. Okay. According to here, retailers and distributors, they'll return the pallets to the nearest service center. So they have locations set up where you ship the containers back when they're empty, and they will take them in and sort them, clean them, and figure out where they need to go. Okay, according to this, so they said their service centers are within 100 miles of 80% of major manufacturing facilities, which, okay, that's fairly easy to do, because when you look at the US, for example, population is concentrated in certain areas. I think that if you ship out of Indianapolis, you literally can hit like 60% of the US population within 2 days by truck. So there's a pretty big concentration. So even though going between, Indianapolis and the East Coast is way more than 100 miles, but it's pretty easy to get around. And when you look at the chart I showed you of the distribution of just the OEMs, and I think I showed you also one that was in homework about locations of the tier suppliers. And they're grouped together, they're concentrated, and many industries are that way. So I can see that could be pretty easy to do, to have your service centers within 100 miles of 80% of major manufacturing facilities, because of that concentration of facilities and populations. It says they also provide tracking through their systems. They are called CHEP Card and Plus ID services. Okay, now I'm going to go way off on a tangent. My experience, this is not what's in the homework. This is, the homework is theoretical. I had a company that I worked for. I was in charge of their packaging function. They didn't have a packaging function, and I started it. When I got there, they already had CHEP. So CHEP had come in, sold their services to the purchasing department. But they were supposed to come in and do an inventory every so often. And again, these containers have RFID tags on them. So they should be able to bring an RFID reader in, wave it, pretend this is an RFID reader, wave it around, and it would actually capture, if there's an RFID tag here, it would read it. If I wave it around, it would read anywhere where there's an RFID tag, and it's pretty accurate. So they come in to do an inventory, and the guy holds the reader down to the floor. He didn't wave it around to capture everything, because if you wave it around, you will read many of the tags. And if you want to continue to read some tags, maybe they got missed, you can do things. There are tricks you can do. Like if you have a wall or ceiling that's metal, that reader, the waves will bounce off of metal, and it'll bounce around until it hits an RFID tag. It'll kind of ricochet, hit an RFID tag, read it. So if you want to, make sure you got the reads, you can wave that reader around and capture more tags. Now, the way these systems are set up, you're like, well, what if I'm waving it? I keep waving at that same tag. It's only going to count the tag once. So the systems are made so that they only count the tag one time. So you're not going to count, if you wave it past a container 50 times, you're not going to have 50 of these containers. It's only going to show that one ID when it scans it. It captures it once. So my personal experience was that they didn't really track it. They were never really explained, but they're like, yeah, well, we figure out how many you have, and you should have 100, but we only brought in 40, so we charge you for 60. We charge you fees. And they had fees on top of fees on top of fees. And I couldn't tell you what these fees were. They could never explain to me. And they were just like, well, purchasing agreed to it, and this is what we're doing. So they were making a lot of money off of this one small plant that they were doing this one particular plant they were doing this CHEP with. So saying it to you is not in a homework, but something to be aware of if you are going to use rental companies. I'm not saying don't use rental companies. I'm just saying understand their contracts, understand their processes, understand what constitutes a fee from your side. Okay. Okay. I talked about this. The CHEP palette is they make it so that it can be easily identified by the paint on its edges. So this is that blue I was talking about. So if anybody ever wants to give me something my favorite color, make sure it's this color. Okay. Seriously though, this is what those palettes look like. Many times you'll see the wood ones that are painted blue, and then they also have palettes that are plastic. So I know you saw this one. This is an Orbis one. This is not a CHEP one, but you see that it's that color. So just to, these again fit into, these can be made to fit within the automotive standard, right? This one in particular. You can see they have containers that, are similar to when we talked about the Rollpacks and the Orbis containers. You've got bulk bins with doors. You've got collapsible bins, all those sorts of things. So you can see this is the bulk bin that is collapsed. So you can see the difference between the full bulk bin and one that's collapsed here and collapsed and stacked. This is important. It says they're accepted by American and European auto manufacturers. So that's because they fit within that automotive standard footprint. Again, you see that whole push towards modularity. They also have the totes that are molded, injection molded. They do have some that are collapsible. I honestly, off track a little bit again, I don't see that many collapsible hand totes in automotive. Most of them are the small totes like this. Sometimes you'll see collapsible ones, but they're so tiny already that most people don't buy those and utilize them. And then we've got the IBCs for things like hazmats. And again, they have a one-way expendable pallet box. So you'll see here, CHEP, it looks very, very similar to the CAPS one. Almost identical. Okay. Okay, so they also have cages. We didn't really talk much about cages. I've mainly seen cages used in international shipments. So the cages are used to hold other material. So you may see boxes or bins or totes inside of this cage, but they're used to ship it internationally. So the international shipments, they may consolidate them and put them into a cage like this. CHEP, I know that they were trying to, I don't know where they are now, but then for a while they were trying to grow their footprint in the US because they were shipping more items from Europe to the US, and then they were shipping back empty sea containers or near empty sea containers to handle the volume of what they were shipping out. So they were shipping more returnables out of Europe towards the US than they were shipping back. So that sounds like a leak situation to me, but it's another story. Okay, and then you've got the large containers that are used in the chemical industry. And then these are what's considered intercontinental containers. So it says intercon here, or ICO, which would be intercontinental. These are made to fit in the sea container. So these are going overseas. And like I said, CHEP has a pretty big footprint in places like Europe and Australia. So using these intercontinental ones that fit on sea containers, that makes sense for them. IFCO is another example. They ship they have a worldwide presence, and they actually have about 2,500 trucks that they use in their system, and they have 75 million returnable containers and another 50 million pallets. So it seems like a lot. When you look at who their customers are, they're more retail. So they've got customers like Target, Family Dollar, Kmart, Del Monte. Cargo is not necessarily a consumer product, but they do ship a lot of products that end up, going in retail. So you can see everything else is pretty much retail or grocery. So they do over $500 million in sales every year. And they also have a tracking program for pallets. IFCO, they do some manufacturing, so they can make pallets brand new. They also have the ability to recycle pallets, and they can do what's called remanufactured. So what's the difference between recycled and remanufactured? So recycled, I can't go through one lecture without pulling out my little toy packaging here, can I? Okay, Brandon, do you have any questions right now while I'm thinking about it?
No, I'm all good.
Okay, so what's the difference between new, recycled, and remanufactured? So new would be just making a pallet from scratch, right? Recycle could be, it was used before, we look at it, it looks pretty good. We'll just, it's in good condition, it can be reused again. Remanufactured would be something like this. You see this pallet has a big chunk out of it? That's not going to necessarily be strong enough to make the trip. So what they would do is they would take this off, repair this, and remanufacture it. Sometimes they have more damage than this. Sometimes it's more than, just one stringer. They may need to replace, half the pallet. They're taking it apart, and they may take 2 pallets and take all the good parts and make a good pallet out of 2 pallets. So, those would be examples of remanufactured pallets. They do custom sizes. So you can see while they've got the grocery sizes for places like Family Dollar, Target, Kmart, etc., Del Monte for grocery, they also will make custom pallets. So, well, CHEP is more focused on the standardized sizes, like for automotive that I mentioned, for example. They're going to stick to standard sizes, where IFCO is going to try to customize more for you. And then they sell them back to IFCO. So while CHEP is taking a pallet and they own it, they're returning it, they're managing it. With IFCO, you buy the pallet, use it, and then return it back to IFCO and sell it back to them. And then when they use it over again, they might recycle it or remanufacture it. So this gives IFCO a good base to have a source of pallet material that they can keep making, either remaking, remanufacturing, or reusing pallets. So it gives them a source, incoming source already, a regular source of material. And this was to make customers take care of the pallets, because a lot of people consider pallets to just be trash. You'll see a lot of people with trucks and they're going behind grocery stores and they're getting pallets, but they're not always in good condition. Or you'll see pallets on shelves, they have, busted stringers, but people use them anyway. So this is to help them last longer. You can see this is their cycle. So we'll start here where they're like doing, let's see. Okay, we'll just start here where it says at the retail distribution center, they go here and they'll recollect and inspect. Okay, so this is assuming that they've already issued out pallets of some sort. They're coming back. So that's they're encouraging users to take better care of the pallets so they can sell them back. They come back, they look at them, make sure they're okay. If they need to clean them, or they even have the ability to disinfect because they're grocery items, they can do that. And then they go back, to storage where if they need to, until they need them again, and then they can dispatch them as needed. This example is with a vegetable. So that's where that disinfection would come in. These containers, once they get dispatched, they would go to the customer, which in this case is a grower or packer. And then they load them up with, you can see, fruits and vegetables. Then they would go to the groceries distribution center. And then it would go to like what they're calling that sales outlet would be, grocery store, Target, or, Del Monte maybe would ship their product to a grocery store, however they're going to do it. And then it, goes to back to their retail distribution center. So it's a cycle, so that you'll notice that one of the main, most important key points to these leasing processes is that they have to be returned. So not only for returnables, if you're buying them outright for your launch packaging, it's also important to keep these lease programs going, or these rental programs going. Okay, so IFCO, they also make crates that are returnable. And they do have steel on them. And they try to make them as simple as possible. So you can see this is really good for like smaller vehicles. This might be an ATV. You might even see this with something like a golf vehicle, because they just need some sort of cage to protect the finished vehicle. They don't want it to get scratched. They want to be able to stack on it and get more in their trailer. But it may not make sense for them to have it doesn't make sense to have a bin like this, put a small vehicle into a bin. So, and they don't want to spend the money to make a whole crate for it. So that would be an example. And then that 7-to-1 collapsible ratio, that's a really good ratio. So they can get a lot more. So where they're sending out these finished products like vehicles, that empty truck, they can fill it up. They don't have to sell for every one truck of vehicles, and the vehicles are pretty bulky, so they really wouldn't want to send back seven empty trucks full of return containers. They just want to send one, because that adds up. The cost to ship these finished vehicles is pretty expensive. Okay, here's some examples of collapsible totes from IFCO. These can be used for display. You see this one kind of looks like a wood crate. So this might be if you go into a grocery store and they wanted to look like, yeah, they just came from the farmer's market. Look, they put them in a wood crate. So, you know, they're a little bit cuter and fancier. Those are, again, for the food industry. Okay, here are some things about Orbis. So Orbis, as we've been going through automotive packaging, a lot of the packaging that you'll see, if you notice, was Orbis, because Orbis is a pretty big player in automotive packaging. You know, they got the standards. They have a large presence here in the Metro Detroit area, so they know automotive, and that's what they focus on. Okay, here are 3 different palettes. You've heard me talk before about the structural foam. This would be an example of it. You can't really see it in this picture, but the structural foam palette, it looks almost fibrous when you get up close to it. They also have the ability to make the modified bolt bins. So you see they have the standard with the standard door, but then they have those modified ones that we talked about earlier in the course, where they cut them out and they can be used line side and hold different materials. And they also can do inner dunnage. So this would be an example of modified standard bulk bin with interior dunnage. And then here, this would be an example of their totes. And even though, like I said, they do sell a lot to automotive, they have a large presence in automotive, they do actually have the ability to, they sell to, you know, grocery. So the grocery industry. So we have, you know, they're FDA approved. They can use materials that are FDA approved. Okay, Tosca is out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, and you can see they're smaller. They have 125 employees at 6 locations versus, let's see, which one do we have? Okay, IFCO had 150 locations, right? Shep, it's kind of a monster from a size standpoint. Let me see, I can't remember what they had here. Okay, they have 12,500 employees and 500,000 customers. And then you've got Caps. So remember, Caps and Shep's combined. So it's even bigger than that. Shep, they're just Shep now. But it's good to see, you know, how Caps worked versus Shep. Okay, so back to Orbis. So, I'm sorry, Tosca. You can see Tosca, 125 employees versus the other larger companies that we talked about. They have 6 locations, And they have 500,000 handheld containers and 3,000 bulk bins. So much smaller, but they have RFID technology. So I'm going to say, compared to some of the other ones that I mentioned when I had my side note, that they are just looking at that, knowing they have RFID technology and knowing that they have a smaller pool of containers, they are much, I'm going to just guess that it's much easier for them to handle their fleet of containers in their process of returns and rentals. They can do drying and cleaning, which is important if they're, if you have a product that tends to be dirty or sensitive to dust or moisture, they can make sure that the containers are hygienic. So when they're selling to food industries, they can make sure that they're clean. And they're dealing with meat as well. So that's another reason why it's really important to have hygienic packaging. And they even deal with MAP or modified atmosphere packaging, which is important for things like the meat. So here is an example of their loop. You can see they have we'll start with the retailer food service. It goes here. They use it, from here, they clean it, sanitize it, it gets sent to the processor fills it, it goes to the distributor. Here's another example. It goes straight to the meat company. It can either get shipped out here in the pallet, or the container gets shipped right back after it gets used, or it can go here and get cleaned and sanitized. So there are a lot of different ways they have. Again, I mentioned they have a smaller fleet. They have RFID tracking, but they're able to handle a more complex loop. So you can see with the other ones, they're just more circular. See, the way they represent it is in a circle. The way they represent the loop with CHEP, again, a circle, right? With CAPS, you see they represent it with a circle. But you see the difference with Tosca, right? They have a more complicated loop. They are, they show here the vegetables and the fruit. I'm sorry, the vegetables and the meat. I must be hungry. Okay, the vegetables and the meat. You can see it here, and that's why it's really important for them to have that hygienic process and be able to track them. Because let's say if there's a meat recall, for example, or a vegetable recall, we've been hearing about that a lot lately, right? When there's a recall, they could actually incorporate their RFID tracking to locate containers. So it gives them a lot of flexibility. Okay, so reusable expendables. That kind of sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? So you can have expendables that can be reused. I've worked on one project years ago where it was a very short loop. So they were going maybe about 5 miles down the road. They were shipping computer components, and they were reusing this corrugated box in the dunnage maybe 5 times. And they were able to like mark the boxes, so we knew how many times they were using it. They would inspect it, make sure it wasn't torn or broken. With the loop that they had, there's very little damage. They probably ended up using these containers like 10 times before they threw them away, and they still pretty much look pristine. Okay, so again, they're made from things like corrugated tubes, wood, and they're made to be a little bit beefier so they can withstand more wear and tear, but not as much wear and tear as a plastic container. But there's somewhere, let's say a pallet, somewhere between this and this, right? So it's not as sturdy as a plastic container, but it's more solid than a standard pallet. Same thing with their boxes. They can be used by auto suppliers, and sometimes you do see that. Okay, you can see here, stacked really high outside. So RCCs are the returnable corrugated containers versus the RPCs, which are the returnable plastic containers. So sometimes you'll see them using RCCs because they might be lower in price. It was cheaper for them to purchase them. And since they're cheaper to to purchase them, then they're also cheaper to replace. People just see it as more of a box. It's a cardboard box. So they're less apt to steal them versus they see the pretty plastic container that I can take home. Even though if they could take that home and reuse it, it's a big box, but they're less apt to do that. If they need to make changes to the packaging, they can do that. It's easier to do that because if you have a corrugated box, for example, now maybe you just need to get a new die if it's a die cut box. Or maybe change where your slots are and change the size of the box and where you're scoring it. But if it is a plastic container like this, now you're dealing with a mold that was purchased for larger volumes. So, those are just some examples of why. I mentioned before, you might have a cutting die, which is going to be much cheaper for a corrugated box than if you have a box for plugging my computer in. Okay, so your your tooling costs for a corrugated box again are going to be much cheaper than the die for a plastic injection molded plastic container. The walls are thinner, so I know that was something that we looked at earlier when you all looked at dunnage. We talked about taking the inside of a container, putting the dunnage in there, and then you have the outside. The walls are much thicker on a bulk bin, a plastic bulk bin, than it would be on a corrugated bulk container, even something like triple wall. They are, even though you can knock down a lot of these containers, they're not really being knocked down flat. They might be a 3-to-1 or 7-to-1 ratio, versus if you knock down a corrugated box flat, it is going to be much thinner. It is easier to dispose of and recycle because many plants already have a compactor for corrugated, so they just throw it in there. They already have a stream for it, and they don't have to worry about necessarily, what are they going to do with this new item to get rid of it. Versus if they have returnable plastic containers, now they've got to figure out where we're going to store these, how we're going to return them, where we're going to stage them, that sort of thing. And this is machinery for on-site conversion from RPCs to RCCs is available. Okay, so those are the advantages. Disadvantages is they don't perform well in wet environments. And I've seen this. I was at a company that was down south, and they would store their packaging outside. And in the South, as I mentioned before with my hair, right, being in Florida yesterday, it rains every afternoon. So if you store anything outside and it rains every afternoon, anything that's stored outside is going to get wet. And if you're using an RCC, it's going to behave very similarly to an RSC if it gets wet. If you have something that needs to be cleaned, if you have a container that needs to be cleaned because of the product, like meat or vegetables or fruit, it's difficult to clean them. And if they are washable, then you have to coat them with something like wax or plastic. So a lot of people don't want to do that because it adds to the cost, or maybe it's not considered as sustainable, depending on what your sustainability goals are. Again, they're more durable than an RSC, but they're not as durable as a plastic container, but returnable plastic container. Depending on how much abuse they can take or can't take, they could end up being more expensive than RPC. So they are, we saw for the expendables how much it would cost versus returnable. But if you are using a returnable corrugated pack and you have to replace them more often, then you're going to pay more. It might be less than throwing, it will be less than throwing away every time, but it won't be necessarily less than, returning it for 5 years. Now, maybe you have to return them, or you maybe have to replace the returnables once a year, which is what I saw with that company I mentioned before. They were replacing their packaging once a year, and they weren't really tracking it because they were storing them outside because they were returnables, but then they would lose them. They would not, the integrity was not good for them. Let's see here. These RCCs, they are, meant for a closed loop delivery system. So again, highly controlled routes, companies that are shipping between, facilities that are maybe, if they're not local, they are regular routes. You have drivers that are dedicated. The driver knows the route. The driver knows people. The driver knows what to expect, and it's part of their routine. So they have to have a lot of control over this. So that's what they're made for. Okay, you see that Walmart one on the right? That one is made of Coroplast, and that looks a lot like the U.S. Postal Service's returnable pack. So we didn't even talk about that, but that's what it looks like. Very similar to that. So, those would be examples of companies or organizations that have a really highly controlled closed loop system. It says they've also been used in the peanut industry. And thinking back, when I'm going to go way back, when I was a kid, my father used to take us to the vegetable store, and we would get warm peanuts, and they were in, when I think about it, they were in bulk bins like that. So, yeah. Brandon, any comments or questions?
You said the Walmart one on the right looks like it reminds me of the Postal Service thing, right?
Yes, it's the same material. So if you,
Gotcha.
yeah, it's the same. If you ever see the U.S. Postal Service bins, they're made out of corrugated plastic.
Okay, I seen one the other day, and I was really looking at it. I'm like, this thing looks strange, but I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, and you'll probably, you probably notice it now. You'll see these totes in everywhere, in a lot of places, and it'll say, something. There's some like it's illegal to have this or own it, and you always see them in places that you're like, oh, that person's breaking the law. But they eventually probably do get returned back. But it is tempting because they're pretty sturdy. Let's say you have a business and you ship with the Postal Service and you go to deliver your stuff, or you get your stuff delivered. Maybe you get a lot of deliveries, a lot of mail. They'll bring those handheld totes and they'll just leave them at your facility, and then people start using them for other things, and eventually they return them back to the post office.
Gotcha.
But yeah, but that's a whole other, I've not even looked into that, but sometimes I just wonder, well, what does that look like? What does their return ratio look like? But that's the packaging nerd speaking again. So okay, so this here is called a P2 pack, right? And it is made of 100% recycled fiber. It's got a lid to it. It's a sleeve. There now are other versions of this that they use Coroplast instead of a corrugated paper material. It's got a pallet. This pallet is also made of paper-based material. And they've made it so that fork trucks can pick it up, or it can go on a conveyor, or you can even handle with a pallet jack. And this one, they have it slated to use somewhere between 6 and 12 times. So DoD, or the Department of Defense, they use this to ship to their bases or the commissaries, which are basically the locations that the military might have, where maybe they go to get like food or, you know, it's kind of like a store. They call it a commissary. And they use them as, for them, they use these as returnables, and they also use them as expendables. And you can see this one here. This looks like it's being used to go in an airplane, right? You've got the pallet here, a larger pallet, and you've got all these hooks and seat belts. This is something, this netting. This is something that you might see get put on a plane. This is an example of what this box looks like when it's set up right here. And this is someone handling it. Okay. So standardization is important because it gives people the ability to plan. When we went through all of those wonderful calculations that I could tell everyone really enjoyed in homework, going through those calculations on a sea container or a trailer, or even on the floor on a pallet, it helps to know that if this bin is purchased from Orbis or whoever, Bradford, whoever, if they buy it, the 48 by 45 is going to have the same footprint. So you can get the same amount in every trailer. So you can have this from 2 or 3 different suppliers, and you can fit, say, 52 of them in a trailer. And you always know that. So that's one thing that makes standardization important. Another reason is, as you go through manufacturing processes, and remember I said the golden rule is never to stop the line, and you're looking at things from an ergonomic standpoint. It makes it really easy for people to handle the product, load an automotive, load the part onto the line, repetitive motion, keeps their numbers going, their tack time, their process and cycle time. They can keep it steady because they're doing the same process every time. So the packaging is one of the foundations of this, right? So you can see here, you know, they're talking about the trade cost. So I didn't even mention that it can increase trade costs because now you're buying packaging in smaller quantities. So, and I've seen this too, where you have a company where maybe they have a 40 by 48 pallet, standard grocery. They make those all day long. It's easier to get those. But then they also, maybe they need a 41 by 47-inch pallet. Why? Because someone decided to size the box up size the pallet up exactly to the box. Well, why not just make the box a half an inch bigger and fit it on a 40 by 48 or, you know, a standard pallet of some sort? But by doing that, now you're buying smaller volumes, and it means that maybe you're, you know, you're buying, it's going to cost more because you're buying this custom pallet, which I mentioned earlier. You're now buying a custom pallet in smaller quantities when all you have to do is maybe go up an inch or down an inch and fit just as many containers or totes or boxes on a pallet. So, you know, those are things that really add up over time. So you saw how, you know, you're shipping all these packs over time and how quickly it adds up from a dollar standpoint. So if you have any bit of inefficiency and you're shipping that over time, over many containers, over many trailers, how quickly that adds up. Maybe a penny over time. You ship a penny difference, but you're shipping 5 million of them. That adds up really quickly. Okay. So that's another thing. In the United States, the vast majority of products are shipped on pallets. And that's so that they're handled, because many things are handled by fork trucks. They can put them on racks that can handle these pallets. That helps with standardization. And we talked about that earlier as well, that if you have standard pallets, you can standardize your racking. And then you can say, this is dedicated to this much space. I know this much product fits in this much space. So if I see this bin with this part number in it, I have so many parts in it. and it helps with things like inventory. But anyway, 80% of the products in the United States are carried on pallets. When they're not, you might see things shipped like via UPS, or maybe they're just small volumes and they're handled by hand. You might see more of this in countries where the labor costs are cheaper. So they will hand load an entire truck or sea container, stack it all the way to the top, 100 inches by hand without a pallet. Maybe they have a fork truck to get up there, but in general, they're packing without a pallet, and then they're unloading it without a pallet. So the pallet can make things much more efficient. Okay, this says like in Europe, in the EU alone, that they use over 300 million pallets every year, just in the European Union. Okay, so just multiply that by the rest of the world. You've got a huge population in Asia. You've got a huge population in Africa. You've got a huge population in South America. You got a huge population in North America with Mexico and United States and Canada. So you just think about that. This is just in the EU. So this is one of my favorite statements here. The number of pallet sizes worldwide has steadily increased because the trend has been to create a new size for every product. Please don't do that. As a packaging engineer, please don't do that. Stick with your standards. Try to make it fit. If you can't make it fit, then maybe you need a different size box. But you really, really want to try to stick to the standards, because the standards are known. If they fit on the truck, they fit on a sea container, they fit on a rail car, you already know this, and it makes it more modular. It's easier to handle. There are so many benefits to using pallets, and this is just me preaching to the packaging choir. Sorry about that. Okay, so again, in the United States, there are over 400 different pallet sizes. So if you ever just hear someone screaming at a distance, that's probably me looking at somebody that has a bunch of different pallets for no reason. They're maybe 2 inches off, 1 inch off, a half an inch off, and they were paying for custom pallets. Please don't do that. Standardize your pallets. Save a lot of money for your company. Be a hero. Look like you've saved this company so much money and they can't live without you. And you get your promotion, hopefully. But standardizing packaging like pallets is one way to do that. Because if I were to look at those 400 different pallet sizes, there are only so many that you can have that fit on a trailer. So, okay. This increases the trade cost across borders, because if you have where one country uses one size pallet, another country uses a different size pallet, they may end up unloading from one pallet onto their preferred pallet. So you want to avoid that, because that's just adding time and cost. Plus, if you have a pallet that's non-standard going through customs, let's say this pallet. Notice this pallet does not have any heat treated markings on it. So it comes across the border. You're using your special handy custom pallet for your special product. It gets over there, custom sees it doesn't have a stamp on it. And this is me going off on a tangent. It doesn't have a stamp. They've got to take it off, look at it. It could cause you issues. But so that's one thing. You don't want to flag it. But then even so, once it gets over the border into towards your customer, they may not be able to handle this pallet because it may be the fork trucks. Where the fork tines are, it doesn't fit because it's not standard. So now they have to take the boxes off the pallet, put them onto their standard pallet so that they can actually handle it, put it in their warehouse racking, put it on the floor by, where they're doing production, whatever it is. And they may have a slot set up for this pallet, but now when they have this pallet comes in, they don't have a slot for it on the floor. So now what do? They have to unload it. Maybe they're only unloading enough of the parts on this pallet to fit on this pallet. And now they got a partial pallet full of products sitting off in a warehouse somewhere where it was supposed to be. And then no one can find it because it's off the beaten path. And then next thing you know, because I've seen this happen before, they are ordering a helicopter because they couldn't find those 8 boxes. They wouldn't fit because they were on a non-standard pallet. So they repacked it onto a rack. But then this pallet of product is still sitting there, and it just sits and sits, and then the parts maybe become obsolete because maybe they've made some changes. So now it's showing in the system that they have 8 parts. In fact, we need those 8 parts for production. They can't find them because they're not in a regular racking. They're sitting off in a corner somewhere, and they finally find them. They're dusty. They find out it's the old version, and they really need those parts today. Otherwise, they're gonna shut the automotive line down. So what happens? They call their supplier and say, hey, I need you to send me these parts ASAP, express ship them. If they're in town, they're gonna get a courier. If they're in another city, they're gonna get a helicopter and fly that part in. All because this was on the wrong size pallet and they had to repack it. Let's see. We talked about repacking. Obviously a waste of time and effort. And each time there's new pallets, consider new inventory. So you really want to try to reduce that. That just adds more complexity and more difficulties and complications for the people that are managing pallets. So pallets were supposed to actually help with standardization, modularization, and as people make custom pallets, they're actually doing the opposite. Okay. Any questions, Brandon? Comments?
No, I'm all good.
Okay. So you've heard me refer to many times the GMA, the grocery pallet, which I'm sure, Brandon, you all covered that in which packaging course already, the grocery pallet.
We covered that one in 322 and 315 actually.
Okay. Yeah, so I won't beat the dead horse about the 48 by 40 pallet because that's a pallet most people think of. However, in automotive, they do use a 48 by 45. So just 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Okay, so like I said, home office / studio. Okay. Okay, so now we talked about this. Okay, so Costco is the exception. We won't even talk about that. So here are some common pallet sizes, right? You can see the 48 by 40 again, grocery and pallet. 42 by 42, that's used by the paint industry. 48 by 48, that one is used for drums because of the round diameter of drums. So they don't want it, they want to have a square pallet. You see again, this is a 40 by 48, basically the same pallet, but it's used for cement in the military. Then there's a 40 by 40, which is used by dairy. And then you see our special automotive pallet. It's a 48 by 45 inch pallet. And you can see they also give these in millimeters as well. So if you use these a lot, if you have to convert, you'll know you're using, you're shipping a lot to other countries if you are able to get to the point where you can convert to metric in your head. But once you stop doing it, you don't know how to do it again. You have to, it's one of those use it or lose it type of things. Okay, and then we've got the 44 by 44, which is again used with drums and chemical. And then we've got the 36 by 36, which is beverage. 48 by 36, which is used for paper and shingles. And then there's a 35 by 45 and a half, which is used by the military. And if anyone goes into the military for packaging, it's a whole other world, right? And then there's a 48 by 20, which is used for retail, which is basically cutting a 48 by 40 and a half, basically. So these are some of the main standards. But, and then, you've got ISO, which is, they have actually, can you believe there's a technical committee on pallet sizes? Who would have thunk, right? So they're trying worldwide to get standardized pallets, but that's an ongoing chore because, like I said, I have seen it, and this is where it's important for you as a packaging engineer to get a good relationship with your product engineers and to get engaged as early as possible, because many times the product engineer will get, if there's no packaging person, they'll get the task of creating packaging for their product. And they will create the box, or they'll work with a supplier who will create a box, a custom box. And then they'll create a pallet for that custom box, which is a custom pallet. And they're making a lot of money, and they're selling the product for that part engineer. And then the product engineer that sits right next to them could be making something that's almost exactly the same size, but the box is a quarter of an inch bigger or smaller in one dimension. They could use the same box and leverage the cost savings from the volume of that and use a standard pallet. But many times it doesn't happen. So that's really why it's important for you as a packaging engineer to understand what is being done from a product standpoint and how much leverage or influence or work they're doing on the packaging side. And then also, you have suppliers that are going straight to purchasing for everything versus packaging. So these are some of the things you can avoid. So these are some of the standards that ISO has come up with right now. You'll notice they're all in millimeters because it's an international standard. And yes, we are really the only country that uses inches. Pretty much everyone else uses metric, but I haven't seen it in a while. I would say in the 70s, I'm dating myself here. In the 70s, there was a big push for everybody's going to learn metric because we're going to use metric for everything. We're not going to use inches anymore. But here we are in the next century. And we have our handy dandy measuring tool that shows us inches and centimeters. But no one really uses, in the United States, no one's using the metric side. We're only using the inches. So anyway, here we go. You can see you've got the 48 by 40, which is that grocery / cement military. You got the 48 by 42, which is the beverage and chemical. And then you can see the rest of these are in Europe. 47.2, 47.2, 44.9, 45.9, 43.3. In Asia and, different parts of Asia, these are used. But you can see that the this one is really close to 45 by 45, but it's in metric. And if you look here, there's a 44 by 44. It's probably the closest one. But you can see they've been working on this for some time, but a lot of companies don't really want to switch over because they're already doing what they do. That's the way they've always done it. And I will tell you, as a person that thinks in terms of how do we become more efficient, this is personal, one of my biggest pet peeves is when someone says, that's how we've always done it. That's the way we've always done it. It's just the way it is. As a packaging engineer, it's okay to challenge that. And when challenge can just be, well, why is that? What benefits, or what benefits does it have? Understanding that. But change is usually one of the hardest parts of the job, just so you know. Okay, so they mentioned Australia. They're, besides having wombats and platypuses and all sorts of weird animals there, they have an issue with having a standard container or standard pallet. Um, they have this container that it's used, they have a container called the race container that's used by the Australian railway, but it does not fit in sea containers. It's not very efficient. So they did a study to see what if we got away from this standard. And they found that it would cost them $2.5 billion. So they haven't not made the change. So again, even their pallets are like the platypus, the wombat, the kangaroo, the anomaly of things. But again, they're a localized region. They might be shipping out, but they're fairly much a contained, no pun intended, a closed loop system in Australia in general. And you can see, you've got countries or regions, like you got Japan and China, but then you got regions like North America and the European Union that when they start talking about going to standards, everybody's like, I'm not paying for that. Somebody else should become our standard. Like we still, you and I, in the United States, we still think everyone should switch over to inches, right? So this will be an example of, just if we can't even switch over to metric, think of how much more complex and difficult it is to switch over to a standard palette that we don't want to switch over to, or because we've always done it. We've got all the pallets, spent all the money, it's going to cost us more money, on and on and on. So this has led people to consider, should we rent pallets? Now pallets are only, the rental ones are only about 10% of the entire usage of pallets. According to this, it says CHEP has made renting a viable option. This is where I say in the textbook they have. When you actually see it in action, you should ask a lot of questions before you sign on to it. That's all I have to say. They are, renting out 2 million pallets a day or in use by their customers. Almost 40 countries, and they have over 100,000 customers across the entire world. There's also something called a pallet exchange. So you have companies that will share pallets. So there are multiple different options out there. Okay, so focusing a little bit more on the automotive industry. Okay, we talked about AIAG. You remember several lectures back, I went to their website and went through my login and just showed you some of the things they had available. They have a lot of committees, or they call them working groups or teams, that are looking at standardizing. So for packaging, they're standardizing tests, they're standardizing containers, they're standardizing pallets and all those sorts of things. So for them, it's, besides obviously one of the functions of packaging is to reduce damage, but it's also, again, that modularity to have, recognize sizes that you can quickly calculate for, large volumes that you're shipping, and understand how efficient or inefficient you might be. So, and then once you have standardization, you can do things like, tracking or, inventory. It's much easier. We talked about this a little bit, how AIG publishes test standards and offers conferences, networking, webcasts, and training. So some of them are free. You could probably go check, I pay for a membership, but you can go check and see what's free. They do have a lot of interesting offerings on their website besides standards. They have events, and if you end up working in automotive, I would say, it doesn't hurt to volunteer and work on some committees with AIAG because they are well entrenched in automotive and they do a lot. They really encourage volunteer work. So I've worked on some volunteer committees, and every so often they will come up with activities for volunteers. So, and they'll give out tickets. Sometimes they'll have concert tickets. They have a suite at, you know, different venues, and they'll send out a notice saying, hey, volunteers, does anyone want to go to this concert? The last one they actually had, which I think it's next week or it might have been this week, but I'll be traveling. They actually had a volunteer event on a yacht for their volunteers on the Detroit River, which, you know, had to be really good. It looked like a really great experience. So they really, really, really do a lot to encourage volunteerism, and that's really what drives their standards. So I digress. Back to our scheduled announcement. Okay, so here are some examples of pallets and the okay, so this is for their returnable containers, but they fit those same pallet footprints. So we're kind of transitioning, but you can see here, we talked about this throughout when we talked about calculations, when we did the homework, we looked at what fits on a truck, just through the conversations that I've had here during the lectures. You can see the 48 is the length, 45 is the width, and then you've got the 25, the 33, and the 50. And remember, those are significant because with the 25, you can stack 4 high to 100, fit pretty well in the trailer, have enough clearance for the fork truck driver to take the bins out. The 33, you can stack 3 high with a little bit of clearance in that 106-inch trailer. And then the 50, you can stack 2 high. So you get, again, that same 100-inch clearance, roughly. And then you have some give and take so that the truck drivers can get in and out of the truck. So that's that 48 by 45 footprint. And then you've got here, you see there is the 32 by 30. And that was the one where, you know, the 32 by 30 by 25 and the 32 by 30 by 33. That's that bin you've heard me call a couple times the baby bin. It's smaller, but that has that same structure for the bulk bin, but it's almost a cube. You can see the 32 by 30 by 33 is literally almost a cube. Okay, so when we talk about design, so now we're kind of really now moving into standardization. So I've kind of tried to segue into this, but really we're at the point where I'm telling you some of the benefits of standardization. And throughout this whole course, I've really hit on standardization and why it's important, but this is really digging into this here. So for AIAG, you know, I mentioned they have these committees. Some of the things that they look for design, they encourage people to do for standardization, looking at your bins, that making sure that they're nestable or collapsible for return trips. So remember, we calculated how much the freight would cost for a returnable program to bring back empties. So anytime you can consolidate and send back in one trailer what could have been normally, you know, multiple trailers, except that they nested or collapsed, then that's always a benefit. You heard me talk about modularity. So modular sizes should be chosen so that the pallet deck is utilized. So you're basically, you know, you're filling out that pallet. You're not going to have overhang. You're not going to have underhang because the pallets and the totes are made to fit in a certain footprint. You can even see, you know, this is a scale size. I've done this before. It's the same. You can fit, you know, you could even stack this pallet. So would you have a full size 48 by 45 by 34 or 33 or 50 or 25 or whatever it is, and you put one of these pallets on it, it fits exactly. So that's another thing. It helps you to utilize your warehouse space or storage space. You could actually have part A here, and then you could have, totes bins on top of that of a different part. So if you need to maybe line side, have a staging area, or maybe in your supermarket where you're kidding or something like that, you could pull these pallets or bulk bins, stack them on top of each other, utilize less floor space, and not have to worry about them. Are they gonna fit? If I put this on it, is this gonna topple over now that I have this non-standard pallet? Or do I have my standard pallet and it fits perfectly? Okay. And again, you see there's no overhang on this either. It fits on the pallet. Okay. Here are some examples where you have the fractions of the modules, right? So this is basically showing your pallet pattern, how you're putting these on a pallet, how many per layer. So if you have a 32 by 30 inch pallet, that means that you could have a box that is 10 2/3 by 10 inches, and you could fit 9 of them per layer, right? Same thing here. If you look at a quarter, if you have a box that's 16 by 15, you could put 4 of them on. And, so on and so forth for these pallets. So you know that if I have this size pallet, I can make my boxes a certain size. In fact, I had that thing that come up yesterday with a client where they're making boxes and they are not to automotive standards. So now they're having trouble fitting them on pallets or getting them shipped in. So, but that's another story. But it's partly because they're not going with modularity. They're not going with standards. They're customizing everything. But as they grow and as they get more business, as their volumes increase, they can't have customization for everything because it's going to lend for less efficiency in the production line. Let's see, what else do we have here? I want to finish this up. So, here we go again. This is an example of 48 by 45 pallet, right? You've got 1/8, and you look at these are going to be very similar to the tote sizes that are used for the handheld totes. So these are very, very close to a handheld tote sizes. And these are some other examples of standards, right? Your load should be secure with stretch wrap, shrink wrap, or banding. So banding, look at plastic. You really want to avoid the metal banding because that will be an issue. People for OSHA, they get hurt. People cut themselves on those metal bands. Modular containers should be nestable or collapsible. We mentioned that already. And interlocking for stability. I already talked about that, right? So no matter what you pick up, if you have these modules, you pick it up, they fit, they're stable, they're not going to slide around. 4-way entry for pallets, because you don't know what direction your fork truck driver is going to be coming from to pick these up. And even like where those fork openings are, they're set so that you can buy fork trucks and set them all to the same fork width. So, you're not gonna have some where the forks are like this and other ones with forks like that and other ones with forks like this. You can have all your forks set to the same thing. And you don't have to worry about, the new driver getting on to yesterday he drove a fork truck with the forks like this. The next day he's driving a fork truck with the forks like that. And he's new, he's inexperienced, he doesn't realize, and he damages the package because he doesn't realize that the forks are in the wrong place, and he's now broken the pallet, right? And you also looking at can these pallets go on conveyor systems too? They also have like temperature ranges that you want to make sure they withstand. And this is going from like minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So you look at the cold end, minus 30. If you're in a cold part of the country or the world, and you put this outside, you want the pallet to withstand that. You want your packaging to withstand that, to not break or crack and protect the product. All the way to 160. 160 could be hot enclosed area. You think, well, how can it get to 160? But maybe it could. If it's a hot day, you're in Arizona during heat season, and you're in a building that's not air conditioned, it can be a surprise how hot some of these facilities can get. Or if you're in an area or a facility that is doing processing with heat, they can very easily get to 160 degrees. That is not unreasonable. So those are some things to understand and be aware of. And then also, if you're looking at handling something by hand, they're saying it should weigh less than 45 pounds. So you probably heard during this whole series of lectures during this course, you probably heard anywhere as low as 25 pounds, all the way to 45 pounds. So they're using this as a worst case scenario. You want to make sure that your packaging can handle that, even though you know that most likely the average person, they're lifting something all day. They're not going to want to lift 45 pounds. And OSHA may not allow that. And then even automotive has even tighter ergonomic standards. However, there might be instances where you can't do anything, but you might have maybe a metal part, a machine part. Those parts are small, but they're very heavy and dense. That might be the only container you can carry it in. And they want to maximize that. So, you want to be able to make sure that it may not get picked up all the time, but they may use it like that. So those are just some of the things that are in chapter 6. So Brandon, speak now, forever hold your peace. Any comments or questions, things you think of?
I'm all good on this one.
Okay. All right. So again, for the homework, go through what's in here. Don't let my jaded experience with CHEP influence you. All I'm going to say is be careful. Listen, ask a lot of questions, and understand what the actual costs are. Because once you're in there, and then, I looked at, even because it was costing so much money to rent these containers, that we had all these extra fees. I inherited this project or this product, and when I went to say, okay, we're spending so much money, when I went to start returning them, they charged a fee to permanently return the containers. So that was unexpected. It was almost like it's almost too expensive to return them, because we didn't budget for that return cost. They made it, in this instance, they made it more expensive to return them to keep permanently than to keep using them for an extended period of time. So just, caveat, just be aware of those things. Let's see, I wanted to go over, let me find it. I wanted to go over the homework as well. Okay, so we've got, okay, so homework. Okay, so remember, homework 5 was for chapter 5. Since we didn't do both, I split up the homework from 5, the first 5 questions. So homework number 6 is going to be the last 5 questions. Okay, so with that being said, I just want to go through here. And so this week's homework is going to be the last 5 questions. So it's going to be 6 through 10. Okay, so number 6 is from the reading, which of the container rental companies in chapter 6 would you likely rent returnable plastic containers for meat shipments? So we talked about that one. I think that one is pretty straightforward. Number 7, which of the container rental companies in chapter 6 that we spoke about had the largest number of wood pallets? Okay, so I think in here they mentioned a couple different ones, like how many, each one had for wood. One has significantly more wood pallets than the other one. Number 8, true or false? The CHEP PLA pallet, that's what the question's about. Is it a single-use disposable pallet made from biodegradable resources such as cornstarch and wood pulp? Okay, so this one, I think you will actually want to look this one up. Because I think we talked a little bit about the PLA palette, but we didn't really go into detail for it. Let me see. I'm gonna do a quick search. Let's see it. Yeah, lots of plastic, but okay, yeah, so this one you will need to Google this. And okay, so when you Google this, you want to look up again CHEP PLA palette. So Google that and see what you come up with. And you want to true or false. Is this a single-use disposable pallet made from biodegradable resources? Is that true or false? And then, why is that? Why is it true or why is it false? Number 9, what is the smallest standard pallet size used in the automotive industry in the United States? So we talk about that. You go back and look at that chart and see which one is the smallest one. And we're just talking about the pallet, not the bin. This is just the pallet. And then number 10, what would the footprint or dimensions for length or width be for a 1/3 fractional module that fits on a 48 by 45 standard container? Or I'm sorry, standard auto pallet, I'm sorry. So again, if you have the 1/3 fractional module, which we talked about here, right? At the end. For the 48-45, you see they didn't do a third here. But what would it be? You can see, like, for the half, what did they do? They took the 48 by 45 and multiplied it by 1/2 to come up with half of 48 is 24. And then for the first one. So if you cut that pallet in half, it is 40. You basically cut it in half. So you cut it half of 48 is 24. But you still have the 45-inch length. Or you can look at it cutting it this way. If you cut it this way, at the 45-inch length, and you have 2 pallets, 2 boxes on that, or 2 totes or bins or whatever on that pallet, you're going to have 22.5 in this dimension. And then it's still going to be 48. So you see they did this for all of them, right? They just took, how did I make this a half? So you probably want to draw this out in the third on the 48 by 45 pallet, draw it into thirds, and then figure out what this is going to be. So you see this one, here's a big hint. This one is a 1/6 of that. So they cut it into 6, but you see it's 3 here. So what does that look like? And it's also 3 here. So you can probably figure out, by doing that. And I want you to use your math. So you can draw it to help you look at it, but I want you to actually show your math for that. Okay. So I think those are all of the questions that we have for homework. Again, I mentioned the extra credit. And I think I also pushed the due date, the time, the date is the same, but I pushed it back to 5 o'clock instead of 10 a.m. And it'll be I'll put that in the system. But I've noticed a lot of you are already doing the homework. So again, tomorrow, Friday, office hours, you will see a couple more lectures. I will try to post both of them this evening. We are basically coming to the end of this course. I personally enjoyed it. I don't know about you all. I hope you did. You can tell I'm just like literally a packaging nerd. I see Brandy gave it a thumbs up. I'm an automotive person. I love cars. My friends laugh at me because they say I drive like an old lady, but I like fast cars. So I've always enjoyed automotive and everything that has to do. So putting together automotive and packaging together, I'm a happy camper. So again, I will be posting the next 2 lectures from when I was traveling. So I apologize for them being late, but I did push back the homework a few hours. But like I said, most people are already doing it. The homework will cover what we talked about today. Everything, the other 2 lectures are going to be supplemental, dealing with sustainability standards that were recently put out, as well as going over fleet calculations again. So those are the things that you're going to see in the next 2 lectures. So, and then any other odds and ends that I just think are interesting for you all. I had some other notes that I want to just make sure I go over with you guys that are just really good to know for automotive, and you can also apply it to industrial packaging. So with that, I am going to say bye. This is the last live lecture, but again, I'm in office hours tomorrow. I hope some of you guys join. Just say hi. It would be great to at least meet you all, see your faces, even if it's for a brief period. So, all right, signing off for now. And again, you can always reach me with any questions. All righty.